To submit to your questions is James Paterson. He's one of the Liberal senators for the state of Victoria. James, good afternoon.
Good to be with you, as always.
And Claire O'Neill, she's a Labor MP for the seat of Hotham. She's Shadow Minister for Innovation, Technology and the Future of Work. Claire, how are you going?
I'm very well, Raf, and it's lovely to be with you and with you too, James.
I want to ask you both, first of all, not about whether or not this is the most emotionally immature response of a world leader to displeasure ever, but Donald Trump has cancelled a trip to Denmark because they don't want to talk to him about buying Greenland, which is just a bit weird. Have you ever wanted to buy something desperately and not been able to, James Paterson?
Yeah, not quite as ambitious as Donald Trump's aspirations, but as a child, I desperately wanted one of those little cars that you could drive in. You know, you see the kids in the park sometimes.
Actually moves along like a battery-driven type.
I desperately wanted it, but never got one. But I now have a 9-month-old son, and so very soon, as soon as my wife will allow me, he's going to get one, and I will live vicariously through him.
That's what we do. Do you remember the conversation with your parents? Like, did you ever express the wish for one? Do you remember what they said?
I think I did. They don't remember it, but I remember persistently asking. Yeah, every time we went to Toys R Us, and we could see it. Sorry, no brand names on the ABC. But every time we went to a toy store,
That's okay.
I expressed my ambition for such a thing, but was not successful.
Parental amnesia. They don't remember things like that.
I'm still recovering.
Yeah, no, I feel your pain. Claire, anything you wanted desperately couldn't get?
Look, I'm the Cabbage Patch doll era. I don't know if that sort of dates me embarrassingly, but yeah, that was
I had
something
a Cabbage Patch doll.
Oh, that's lovely,
Yeah,
Raf. How forward-thinking of your lovely parents there. Yeah, that's very hip. So probably that, but yeah, I don't know. It's a long
But you were
time
denied.
ago.
You had one and wanted more, or you were denied?
One could never have enough Cabbage Patch dolls, Raf.
It was
So
N
I
plus
think
one.
I had one down the line at some stage, but yeah, I wanted a family.
I'm feeling the childhood pain. They're both emotionally scarred for life. Look, 10 minutes past 5, ABC Radio Melbourne. James Paterson, was interesting to me that as soon as the Prime Minister announced we're going to send, I think it's one frigate for 6 months, one surveillance aircraft for 1 month. So it's not the biggest contribution, but it means America can say other countries are with us. Why? America's had lots of follies in the Middle East. Why are we taking part in this one?
Well, we're joining not just the United States, but also the United Kingdom, because Australia's got a really strong interest in the free flow of oil and other commodities out of the Strait of Hormuz. A very significant proportion of our crude and refined oil, as was on your program before, on the news item before, comes out of that strait. And if the free flow of commercial vehicles, ships in that region is being impeded by piracy or hijacking or other threats, then it's in our interest to make sure that that freedom of navigation is able to be upheld.
Isn't it a problem America's making? Donald Trump's the one who tore up the agreement on Iran's nuclear weapons program. It was the British that seized a ship in Gibraltar. It's not simply a matter of the rest of the world sat back and Iran's done all the bad stuff. I mean, both sides are a bit responsible for this, aren't they?
I'm not conceding that point, but even if it were true, that doesn't matter because Australia's interests are still served by a free flow of goods and services out of that region.
Do you care if Iran just sees us on America's side?
Pardon me?
Do you care if that means that Iran just says, well, Australia's just on America's side, we don't talk, we don't bother to correspond with?
Well, I mean, if forced to choose between Iran and America, I think it's a pretty easy choice for Australia.
Claire?
Well, I think, James has talked a little bit about one of the important points here, which is that this is strategically important for Australia. So it's not just us going in to support allies, but actually to defend our own national interest. I don't want to get into the specifics of this because Labor actually hasn't been fully briefed on what led up to this and the specific request that was made. But I think just, the tone of your questioning there, Raf, we need to be careful here. I understand a lot of Australians don't think much of Donald Trump, but it doesn't mean that everything America does now is stupid and unwarranted.
But they did tear up the Iran deal.
Yeah, I mean, that's the case, and I think there's plenty of global thinkers that have got a lot of criticism about the way that was handled, but it doesn't mean that every foreign policy move now that America does is something that Australia shouldn't be involved in.
You don't fear it's another US military folly in the Middle East?
Well, I'll say again, the government's made a call about this. I don't think it's helpful for opposition MPs like me without proper information to be going around freelancing about whether this is a good idea or not. What I want is for Labor to get properly briefed. That's happening this evening for our leadership, and we'll have a little bit more to say on this. But until then, I think it's important to just hold fire a little bit and let's just understand a bit more what's led up to this.
1300 222 774 is the phone number. James Paterson from the Liberal Party, Claire O'Neill from the Labor Party. They will take your questions if you want to sling them their way. James Paterson, the essential gist from nations like Tuvalu is we're not doing enough when it comes to climate change. We just don't have a policy worthy of the name. What do we do about that?
We completely understand why climate change is an existential question for a lot of low-lying islands, Tuvalu included, and our Pacific friends and family. And that's why we don't only have our own commitment to reduce emissions under the Paris Agreement, but also we made, when the Prime Minister went to the Pacific Islands Forum, an additional commitment of $500 million to help them.
It was repurposed money.
Well, it was an addition to what we'd previously been made in this area. It's a new commitment of money to the Pacific Islands to help deal with climate mitigation and adaptation and to help them overcome the effects of the climate change that is going to happen, that we know is going to happen.
But they said you're trying to help us fix the problem here. You're not doing enough there to solve the cause of the problem.
Well, Australia on our own cannot avert climate change. We could shut down Australia tomorrow and that would not avert climate change. We have a role to play and we're doing that through the Paris Agreement. But the request that was made of us by some through that forum is a request that no Australian government could ever agree to, and that was to phase out our coal industry in Australia. I noticed that Penny Wong on Insiders on Sunday said that the Labor Party would not have agreed to that either. Were they in government and was she attending that forum to represent Australia's interests? Because most financial years, the coal exports are either our first or second largest export. It is a really significant income earner for this country, and it will be, as Penny Wong said, for many, many years to come. So we could never agree to a request like that, but we do need to take their concerns seriously.
Claire O'Neill, I'm sure everyone is very aware of what Penny Wong said on Insiders. She is the Shadow Foreign Minister, but are we doing enough?
We're definitely not doing enough, and I thought the performance that was put on in the Pacific Islands was just, frankly, just incredibly embarrassing for a number of reasons. One of them is that it just shows that when we don't have climate targets that are actually going to do what needs to be done on climate, when we don't have any policies that even meet the paltry targets that have been set, we have absolutely no authority when we go into these regions and try to fulfil our national interest. I mean, why would the Pacific Islands listen to anything that we have to say when we are not responding?
What do you mean? What was embarrassing? I'm not sure what you mean.
It's embarrassing because the federal government has set down targets that are not going to save any of these Pacific Islands. They do not have a policy even to meet those targets, and that's why even though they say that they're committed to reducing our level of emissions in Australia, our emissions are going up and there's no policy response to stop that from happening.
I'm happy to get onto the policy.
Yes, but can I just make one more point? I think the other thing is just the level of disrespect that was shown. I mean, we've got the Deputy Prime Minister coming out in the days following that forum saying that, we'll let people come and pick fruit here in Australia. I mean, what an offensive comment to make. And I just think we need to be better about this. We had, Peter Dutton and Tony Abbott, laughing about what's happening to these islands, and it's just not a laughing matter. And I think that's reflected in the stance that's taken by the government, but also in the way that they're managing this important issue.
I'm happy to get on to the policy because I can't actually remember how many Liberal Party representatives I've asked about emissions policy. But just on the embarrassing, what you say was embarrassing behaviour, isn't there a case actually to be made that, and again, I'm happy to discuss the policy, Scott Morrison and Alex Hawke were actually incredibly respectful, weren't they? I mean, they really, in terms of the words they used, their participation in local custom and culture, that was actually incredibly respectful, wasn't it? Well, they actually behaved. Alex Hawke did really well in terms of just talking to people in the region.
Yeah, okay. I mean, I don't think they're disrespecting their culture, but the very existence of these countries is threatened by climate change. And it's great that we've got our national leaders who will go over there and wear traditional dress, but that doesn't mean much when we're not doing about the fundamental issue that threatens the existence of their countries and their livelihoods. So that's where the disrespect is.
Peter's called from Werribee. What did you want to say, Peter?
James, question to you. Could you go back to your media advisors and wipe the word family off your dialogue? They are not family. It's only family when you want to be involved with them. They are Pacific neighbours who you have let down.
What's wrong with the word family, Peter?
It's an ingratiating term used by politicians to swami up their conversation and to feel like we've engaged with them. And family to me is my brother, sister, mother, father.
Okay. James Paterson.
Peter, with all due respect, I don't think any of the Pacific Islands are offended when we use that term. I think they understand it's a term of endearment. I suspect you don't speak on their behalf. And when Scott Morrison uses that kind of language when he's over in the Pacific Islands, he's very warmly received.
Just on the policy, James Paterson, I have asked your former Environment Minister, your current Emissions Minister, former Minister Kelly O'Dwyer, Tim Wilson.
I'm unlikely to provide a better or more satisfying answer than all of them, Raf, I fear.
Just pointing it out.
That's the sort of humility we don't see enough of.
That's okay. Right. And I've emailed the Environment and Energy Department. All I can see is 8 pages of a glossy pamphlet to say that the government will meet their targets. When Labor says you don't actually
which targets are you talking about, Raf? You're talking about 2020 or 2030?
2030.
Okay, because I think you would concede that the 2020 targets, there is very good evidence we're going to meet and, in fact, exceed those targets.
No one disputes that.
Well, that's important, Raf, because our only targets are not just the 2030 targets. The first deadline we've got coming up is 2020, and we're on track to achieve it.
Sure. Can I ask the question again? Emissions have gone up every year for the last 5 years. So when the government says that we're going to meet our Paris targets, which would need our emissions to go down, there's no policy. There's an 8-page glossy pamphlet. When are we going to see the policy?
I don't think that's fair. I mean, you can deride the form of paper that it was printed on or the number of pages that it entails, but we have a $3.5 billion climate solutions package, which involves a myriad of different measures that will help lower our emissions.
Why isn't it lowering emissions then?
Well, that will take time, but we're confident based on our performance to date that we will achieve it by 2030.
Maybe let me ask the question in a different way, because I don't want to hammer you over the head. I'm just genuinely interested in how we measure what politicians say. When I emailed the department, I said, where's the forecasting or the modelling or the projections that show you can meet your targets? There are a lot of really vague things on a graph, like technology improvements and an electric vehicle program. I'm fine with politicians saying, look, not everything is set in stone. But I have not seen any forecasting or any projections. There is quite literally an 8-page document. That is all there is. Am I being unreasonable wanting more than 8 pages?
Well, let's talk about the technology achievements that we're forecasting.
No, I want you to tell me. I've had lots of people from the Liberal Party tell me all the policies that are going to get us there. It's word salad. Because all we'll do then is disagree about which policy might be best. And I don't know that that's particularly helpful. But let's try and have a serious discussion.
Well, you might think you know where I'm going, Raf, but with respect, you didn't let me get a word out, so I don't think you do.
Go for it.
What I want to talk about is technology. And one of the things I'm fundamentally optimistic about this thing is that a lot of technological change is unanticipated and unexpected, and the pace of it is unanticipated and unexpected. So we cannot, of course, know for sure what technologies are going to emerge in the next few years or how successful they're going to be or where the emissions reductions are going to come from exactly. But we do know that there are thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, of brilliant people around the world working on these things.
So meeting our targets is based on hope.
For example, no, it's not. That's not fair.
Magic,
it's based on experience.
Magic.
So, for example, the improvement in efficiency in photovoltaic solar panels over the last 30 years has been more than most people predicted. They have developed ways of harvesting far more energy from the same amount of sun and, in fact, fewer solar panels than they previously thought that we could. Those are the kind of technological advances that happen that, of course, as a politician, I can't say for you today in your studio for sure it's going to happen in this way at this time and it's going to produce this result. But it doesn't mean it won't happen. And we have confidence about the future because of what we know has happened in the recent past. If those trends continue, then there's really exciting things that could happen in this space and I think will help us achieve those targets.
Am I wrong to expect forecasting or modelling from a department to back up a government policy?
Well, look, in some areas it's easier to do than others, but the government said time and time again, we are confident that we'll achieve our targets and I believe we will.
I'll get Claire's view on this in a moment. Gary's called on the Iran, I shouldn't really call it that, on the Straits of Hormuz issue. I think the government would prefer if I called it that. Gary, what do you want to say?
Yes, hi, Raf. Look, I'm listening to what you're saying. I firmly believe that Australia should be doing our part as part of the ANZUS Treaty to show that we are a power in the overall world peace effort. I believe also that you're just talking now about emissions and so forth.
Oh, yeah.
I believe that, yes. Yeah, look, Raf, I don't know why the ABC... just answer me this. Is good reporting meant to be neither left or right, but down the centre, because I don't know why I'm always getting these leftist views against policies from America with Trump. I think he's a great leader. I think
you
we
think
can
asking for policy substance is a leftist view, Gary?
Well, frankly, I think it's totally overblown. I think the efforts against the wars overseas and the trials and tribulations that people are having overseas through what goes on in Iran and Iraq, etc. I think America's doing the right thing. They back Israel, which is the only country that's in the Middle East that's actually representing Western nations and any kind of real middle line sort of, support.
I hear you, Gary, and I can hear you're happy with the government's military decision today. I've got to get to some traffic with Dan Belling. Hi, Dan.
Thank you, Raf. The Westgate Freeway outbound, very heavy from the Bolte Bridge, crawling over the Westgate and out to the Princes this afternoon. There's also delays heading out on the Western Freeway. It's heavy from the Deer Park bypass as far back as Fitzgerald Road. That's out to Hopkins Road with a possible incident. On the Bellarine Peninsula in St Leonard's, McLeod Street is closed to all traffic between Dudley Parade and St Leonard's Parade with a very serious smash there. Police will be investigating into the evening. And in Clyde North, clearing up on Berwick-Cranbourne Road at Kite Street. That's just south of Grices Road. For the trains, the Hurstbridge line, the 521 Flinders Street to Greensborough service has been cancelled due to a vandalised train. If you see anything on the roads, call us 1300 222 774. That's the latest Melbourne traffic.
9 o'clock tonight, Utopia is back in a brand new season.
I reckon it could be a game changer. Let's hear it.
Shaping the nation with big ideas.
They're building skyscrapers out of cardboard.
Bold initiatives.
What was that thing we did last year with the terrorists and the pedophiles?
Dog whistle.
Encryption.
And lots of buzzwords.
Microstructure. Ruralisation. Nanotecture.
That's the sort of thing people want to hear about.
What does it mean?
I'll send you a link.
The brand new season of Utopia premieres 9 o'clock tonight on ABC TV and iView.
Raf Epstein on ABC Radio Melbourne.
James Paterson is here. He's the Liberal Senator for Victoria. Claire O'Neill is a Shadow Minister and Labor MP. Every Wednesday, we just ask some politicians to come in to answer your questions and mine. Claire, there wasn't substantial modelling from Labor in the lead up to the last election. But let me ask, I want to ask the same question in a way. What should I expect of the Labor Party? Because you're going to come up with a policy before the next election.
Yeah.
Do I demand that Labor go out and get extensive modelling on meeting emissions targets 7 years beyond the next election?
Yeah.
What do I ask for as a voter?
I think certainly when Labor's in government, I mean, this is the fundamental work of government departments. So from opposition, we have a very different kind of resourcing picture, and that has to be taken into account. But I think what you should be demanding of the government now, and what you should therefore demand of Labor before the next election, is to take a serious target that's actually going to meet the requirements for us to keep global warming within a manageable set of degrees for your kids, James, and for my kids to have to deal with in that next generation, and a set of policies that are actually going to do it. And that's what's lacking at the moment. You know, we're going on for 7 years that this government's been in power. The better part of a decade, we have been adrift. And in the entire time I've been in Parliament, I've been coming on this show and many others, and we're having the same conversation about climate, and something has to change. And that's got to come from the Liberals, because they won the election fair and square. Now they have to take a change on this climate change issue and get us forward in this conversation.
I'm sure James wants to respond. I'll bring in Charlotte from Warrandyte, and then James will get a go to respond to it all. Charlotte, what did you want to say? Charlotte, you there?
Raf. Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that an 8-page document on what is possibly the future of our planet and our species is absolutely pathetic. I'm incredulous that Mr. Paterson thinks that it's okay that the government has no direction on climate change. It's absolutely disgusting, and I'm very, very angry.
Okay. Why don't you address that first, James, and then I'll get to Claire O'Neill.
Well, I understand why people are concerned about this, and I think the 8-page document meme that you're running here, Raf, is giving people a misleading impression, because $3.5 billion of Commonwealth expenditure doesn't just happen on the basis of an 8-page document. And so, yes, we have put out a document that explains what our policies are in that form. That doesn't mean that's the only documentation that government relies on to roll out policies like these. But I really want to come back on Claire's point. I mean, it is not the typical thing after an election for the opposition to say that that the government now needs to change its policies, having just won the election. It's usually oppositions that reassess their policies after having lost elections. And we saw in the Australian newspaper today a leaked submission from the Labor Environment Network into the Labor election review that absolutely panned Labor's climate policy and finger-pointed it as one of the failures in the election, one of the reasons that they didn't win. So I think more up for grabs than the government's policy, which was endorsed by the people at the election, is in fact Labor's climate policies.
Can I, just before we go, I wanted to get your responses to the Court of Appeal. They basically upheld Cardinal George Pell. He's still a cardinal prison sentence. I think he's been in jail for about 180 days. He's got something like a 6.5-year jail sentence, 3.5 years until he is up for parole, likely to lose the title of cardinal, likely to lose his Order of Australia if it isn't appealed in the High Court. Are we better off for the legal process running the way it has, do you think, James Paterson?
I think we are, and I think whatever your view on the verdict or the case, the best thing is to let the legal process follow through its natural course, and for all of us to respect and accept the verdict as it's delivered by the court. None of us are in a better position to make a judgment about what happened than the judges.
People in the media are pretty furious about the debate. Is that? What do you make of that sort of commentary?
Well, people are entitled to have strong feelings about court cases and to take up arms on either side if they wish, but my view is that how could we be in a better place to make a judgment about this than the judges or the jury that oversaw it? And of course, George Pell has the right to appeal further if he wishes, and it may yet go to the High Court and they may yet express their view on the matter. But as it stands, I think we just have to accept the Court of Appeal decision and respect it.
Claire O'Neill?
I mean, the days like today, I just, think instantly of all the survivors, because I know that this being in the news, just that fact opens up the wounds for a lot of people who've just suffered the most horrendous and just inhuman acts of abuse. So I'm thinking about that, but I also just feel like this is a great day for justice in our country. Really, this was a David and Goliath court battle with one of the most powerful Catholics in the entire world, with the Vatican funding all the legal proceedings for this person.
We don't know who funded it, do we?
Oh, well, I guess, hopefully that will come out. But, against a young man who has just done something extraordinary for our country, really, for all these tens of thousands of Australians who have suffered abuse, this one survivor has, whoever he is out there, we do thank him, because this must have been extraordinarily personally costly for him. And he's done something to show us that our justice system does work. And if you are telling the truth, then you can win. And I just think that's really important for those survivors today to hear that we believe their stories and the court system will get the right answer for them. And that was what was upheld today. And I just think it was, a brilliant result for that community.
I don't even know if this is a fair question, but as an impassioned statement, would you feel the same way if it went the other way? If it was 2-1 supporting an appeal?
I mean, no. I mean, I obviously would feel differently about it, and, that's part of the problem with these things. But the thing with these sexual abuse cases is that the Royal Commission showed us this is an epidemic in some parts of our country. Hardly anyone is brought to justice because they are so, so, so hard to prove. And here we have a young man whose testimony was so compelling. When you read what the appeal court judges said today, this was a person who had to be believed. And this is just a very powerful thing for us. So I just think, for all those survivors out there who are listening, we want this system to work better. And there's no better way to, pay recompense to those people to see the wrongdoing actually upheld in a court of law as it was today.
Sorry, James, you were raising your hand there. You wanted to add something? Or no?
No, I completely understand Claire's point of view, and my heart goes out to those survivors too. I think the PM really struck the right note today when he said, if you know people like that in your life, now is a good time to reach out to them, because it will be a very traumatic experience, and for many to relive what they've been through.
Yeah. Daniel's in Keilor. I think it's a comment, not a question, but what did you want to raise, Daniel?
Just with regards to Australia going in there with the US into the Strait of Hormuz, I think it's very foolish. For starters, the whole reason why there are tensions there, everybody knows, is because the US pulled out of the nuclear agreement that all the world's powers agreed to. Now, there wouldn't be those tensions there if Trump didn't have his maximum pressure. Now, and then as soon as there are tensions, Australia's the first to go, yep, I'll be part of that. All the others, like Germany, didn't want to be part of it. France didn't want to be part of it. The Middle Eastern nations pretty much they didn't put their full support into it.
Well,
and so it's basically Australia giving full support to what Trump has been doing.
Interesting, Daniel. I think we've heard pretty clearly what James Paterson and Claire O'Neill think of that. Thank you very much both for your time. Really appreciate you coming in.
Great to be here. Thanks, Raf.